protecting workers from heat means I need to give them more welfare. If I give you more rest means you're not working, so how can that lead to more productivity? Heat is what we call a silent risk, a silent threat, the silent killer. They looked at the data over the past 20 years, and about 500 million deaths occur because of heat, and 45% of that occurs in Asia. The stress on the person actually comes from three main factors. So one is the environment. The other thing is the attire. Finally is the...
Hi everybody, Edric here. Welcome to the OSH Insights podcast. This podcast is tailored to the safety professionals in Asia. We're putting this podcast together to highlight the trends and also, perhaps, challenge the status quo to make a better and safer workforce. Today's topic is all about heat resilience and performance in the workforce. Now, most of us would really associate heat to outdoor work or field work. But how many of us actually realize that there's this thing called indoor heat as well? So that being said, in this episode of the OSH Insights podcast, you're going to hear a lot more about this topic in terms of solutions and strategies on how to tackle direct and indirect impacts of the changing climate here in the region. So in this episode, we've brought in the experts to talk more about that. We've got the co-director of the Heat Resilience and Performance Center here in Singapore, Miss Lydia Law. All right, before we start the podcast, please mark your calendars. The region's leading trade fair for all aspects of safety, security, and health at work, Occupational Safety and Health Asia 2026, will be held from the 9th to the 11th of September 2026, Hall C, Marina Bay Sands Expo. So head over to osha-singapore.com to find out a little bit more, and don't forget to get your tickets as well. Now on to the podcast. Hey, hi Lydia. Thanks so much for joining us on the OSH Insights podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Making the trip over here, we planned a lot, for this podcast, talking about heat, resilience, and performance. But I think before we actually begin with that topic and deep dive into it, tell us a little bit more about Heat Resilience and the Performance Center. First of all, I've seen it featured a couple of times here and there in so many areas like work and sports, and even in the covering residential topics as well. So tell me a little bit more about what the HRPC does.
Thank you. Well, the center really is focused on conducting research to better understand how the body responds to and adjusts to heat. Because heat impacts every aspect of our life. And so we want to understand how heat impacts our health, our work, our safety, our productivity, and our performance. So the research really is focused on those aspects. As you correctly pointed out, we will look at it throughout all the life, what we call the life stages, because heat will impact the very young, the very old, different occupational sectors. And therefore, there's a need to better understand the impacts. And that's where our work is focused on. The ultimate aim really of our research team is to really transform and harness the knowledge and the evidence that we've gotten from the research and transform and translate that into knowledge, strategies, solutions that we can all use so that we can continue to live, work and play, because it is going to get hotter, unfortunately.
I saw some research recently. I think it was from the World Met Organization, and it's saying that the Central Asia is actually heating up faster than any other part of the world. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. The weather is actually going to be the weather change is going to be a bit more starkly felt, especially in the Central Asia region as well as the Southeast Asia region. And I think that's where the challenge is, because we grew up, I think most of us will, in Singapore, in tropical areas, and we are what we like to think, tropical natives. So we think that 1 degree, 2 degrees doesn't sound too bad, but we are beginning to feel this small difference in very different ways. And we are beginning to realize that it is going to be a challenge. If I may add, the key thing here is a lot of the resources and work actually is not placed in these areas that what we call are vulnerable. There's quite a lot of work done in the global north and the global south where you have heat waves, because you have the summer season, and that's where it can get quite drastically hot. Whereas here in Asia, Central Asia, and all of us in this tropical space, we deal with it all the time. So we don't think that a 1 degree, 1.5 degree difference is going to make a lot of difference. And we've become so acclimatized or accustomed to the heat that we think it's not going to be a problem. So we will adjust.
what I find very interesting about the HRPC is that you see, once again, I've only seen the coverage that you have in sports and the residential areas, but very much about work. Now, I'm going to ask a very, very silly question. So please, I hope you entertain this a little bit more. First things first, right? Why do you think we really should look into this? Because now the workforce in Asia, first off, I'm going to look at it from a Singaporean lens. We're already very safe. It's part of our culture. So if it's already very hot, right? Why don't you just get out of the heat? Is there something that I'm not seeing that the HRPC has to actually come up and be developed and start looking into these things? What difference is it really making?
So thanks for bringing out. I actually really touched, you really got the answer to your question in your articulation. Is the unseen. Because heat is what we call a silent risk, a silent threat. And if you go to the extreme, it is a silent killer. It's quite different from other, what I call weather phenomena that we see as a result of climate change. You think the typhoons, your floods, and all of these are more devastating and causing more death. But actually, there is research being done. They looked at the data over the past 20 years, so 2000 to 2020, that the leading cause of weather-related mortality is not your typhoons and your floods, it is actually heat.
Wow.
Yeah. And so based on that study, they found about 500 million deaths occur because of heat and exposure to heat. And 45% of that actually occurs in Asia. So if we zoom down and look at more from an occupational and worker perspective, there are numbers. So the ILO actually just released quite a comprehensive report last year looking at the impacts of heat on worker and heat exposure. And what they found, if you don't mind me reading so that I don't get the facts wrong.
Pardon me, what's the ILO?
The International Labour Organization. Yeah, so they look out for workplace and workman safety, essentially. So worldwide, we do have close to 2.5 billion workers who are exposed to heat and excessive heat. And this actually constitutes about 70% of our global working population. Every year, the statistics is that excessive heat results in close to 23 million injuries and close to 20,000 deaths on the job. These numbers are staggering, and it's what I think we don't typically see in the news, and therefore it is less visible. And we're only talking about deaths and injuries. They've also reported that with climate change, Europe and Asia, as we've already discussed, are seeing more increases, and they're expecting about 20% more of our workers now are being exposed to this challenge of excess heat. I think what I found particularly interesting in the report was that actually these injuries and exposures occur outside of what we know as heat waves. So you may think that all these things happen because of heat waves, because suddenly there's an onset of extremely high temperatures. But what they actually found is 9 out of 10 of these worker exposures actually occur outside of a heat wave. And 8 of the 10 related injuries occur also outside of the heat wave. So both death as well as injuries, a large proportion of that actually occurs outside of the heat waves.
What is the main cause of that?
So I think the bottom line and the takeaway for me now is not only about heat waves, it's about exposure to heat. So I think the key thing we want everyone to take back and maybe to understand is not only when I get extremely hot in terms of the weather that I need to worry. I need to worry if as long as I'm exposed to heat. And that's a subsequent discussion of then, okay, how much heat can one be exposed to? And there are considerations around that. Yeah. So I think also the other takeaway is not only does it need to be hot that we need to be worried about, there are other factors that impact whether or not a person is safe or unsafe in his or her role. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things we also talked about offline was that there's this concept of indoor heat. So I'm just wondering, right, with this number of mortality and injury that comes through heat, right? I mean, it's like over 200,000 people, in Asia are actually getting these kind of injuries and all, right? What is the factor of indoor heat that we need to look at?
Yeah. So be it indoor and outdoor, the impacts on the person or what we call the stress on the person actually comes from 3 main factors. So one is the environment. So if you're outdoor, you need to be concerned or you need to be aware of the outdoor environment. So that would be your temperature. Don't forget the humidity, your exposure to the sun. So these are your key factors. Indoor, similarly, it doesn't mean that you don't have the sun, means you're not exposed to heat, because there are instances in indoor environments where you do have heat sources. and you do work with machineries, and all of this does produce heat. The other bit is also how well ventilated the environment is, because that will then affect how much heat gets built up, how much heat gets removed, and how much air exchange there is within the environment. So we have the environment. The other thing we think about is the attire. So what the person wears in his or her role, be it indoor or outdoor, because that also affects how easy the human body can regulate and or lose heat. Finally is the person itself. It's about the adaptive capacity. So how each one of our workers, how big that capacity is to adapt to the heat. And that can go down to several different factors. So how old you are, whether you have any pre-existing comorbidities, how fit you are, whether you're acclimatized or not acclimatized to the heat, whether you have any underlying immune compromised bug that you may be harboring. So all these things do factor to your adaptive capacity. So put all these three together, it will then determine how ready or how much risk or stress a worker is, be it indoor or outdoor, to responding to heat.
I see. So it's again, it's environment.
Yep.
It will be your personal equipment.
Yep.
And also now it's the adaptability.
Correct.
These are the three things that we're really looking into.
Yes.
It's really interesting that you brought this up, because in the previous episode that we did with Lars, one of the things that I took away from was that PPE, personal protective equipment, is going to, it's also partly a fashion statement. So it has to look good. Now it also, from what you're saying, it also has to feel good.
Yes. Yes.
Well, that's very interesting that that the whole industry is actually shifting in that area as well. And do you think that there are also a lot of players in this market who are trying to do more of that? Because you see, what you're saying is, especially for indoor heat, this piques my interest, because what industries right now do you think are really looking into this and taking this super seriously?
Yeah, I think in many of our conversations, some of them are what I call hybrid environments, where workers need to transit both indoors and outdoors. So they're beginning to understand, how does this impact our workers and what can we do? So when it comes to indoor heat particularly, I think I already mentioned the ventilation of the space is one. The other one is the attire. It is tricky to maintain function and fashion to some extent, and also protection, because certain jobs require a certain amount of PPE for safety purposes as well. And I think what we can layer on, and I think this is also classic in the occupational community, when you do risk assessment, you do look at the man, you look at the machine, and then you look at the environment. So similar. And I think one easy way, since you already have that kind of this framework, is to layer on then where heat comes in those aspects. I think there is probably some consideration, but I think now with a bit more awareness, you can appreciate a bit more how this intersects with the men. So we talk about adaptive capacity, the machine, the PPE potentially, and the environment that he or she is working in. So there are textile factory places that are concerned. And so we're talking to them to see from a PPE perspective. The other way that we do, so looking at behavioral strategies, is to see whether we can institute what we call work rest cycles. So we advise after working a certain amount of time, you dedicate certain amount of time for rest. And this will then allow your core body temperature to come down, your physiology to come out, recalibrate before you go in and start a next bout of work. There's also, of course, pre-cooling strategies that you can use. Drinking cold water. We also looked at ice slurry in more exertional instances. As long as there is good ventilation, that also helps. As long as the person gets a chance to cool down in a well-ventilated environment, that's also useful. And then when it comes to adaptive capacity, we spoke about fitness. So we will also very strongly advocate it's very important to keep fit. It will check many boxes. It keeps you healthy, keeps your immune system strong, and it also boosts your heat resilience. So being fit and healthy, it definitely is also a good protector.
One thing I want to shift the lens to is a little bit more on, as an ops lead or a safety lead. Now, you mentioned the risk assessment matrix. You mentioned how these frameworks are all commonplace, right? But do you think that as things have changed and evolved, this framework also needs to evolve? And in that, right, do you think there's a shift in priority now? Because I don't know whether or not heat is really up there on the ladder or not.
So good point. I think it will depend on industry. As I mentioned before, I think because heat cuts across all aspects, it's important in your risk assessment process to put that on as well. And also, if I can give an example, we may not have thought heat would be a huge issue because I think if you do rank all your occupational injuries, heat is probably at the bottom. And say, for example, I think, and I know in some industries, let's say my hearing-induced loss could be at the top. So we, of course, then dedicate resources to kind of solve that problem. So we have ear defenders, you have earplugs. But then after a while, you say, how come hearing loss is still up there, even though I have all my protective gear? So I encourage people to look at, okay, we hypothesize that it could be because it's uncomfortable to wear these ear defenders. Because even for me, I'm working in a hot environment, indoor or outdoor, I have to wear these things. It is likely that whenever I get a chance, I would shift it or I may take it out. And because of that discomfort due to heat, it therefore reduces the protection that the ear defenders give me and therefore still resulting in me, impacting my hearing.
Right.
So that's an example of how heat can layer on. And that is why it is important when we do look at priorities, depending on industry, of course, to put on that lens to see, okay, is there any way that heat could have started or triggered, be part of that triggering process?
Right.
Yeah.
It sounds like there should be an adaptive matrix, huh? Because right now, I think everybody's still using the same form. Let's put it that way, right?
Yes.
I'm just going to call it out as it is, okay?
Yes.
So if you are, please don't be offended by this, okay? But nonetheless, I mean, the form has been there for a long time.
Yeah, and I think it serves its purpose.
Definitely.
Yeah,
But do you think that there's going to be room for, let's say, for example, AI-enabled or AI-led adaptive safety matrices for heat management?
Potentially, I think so. We are looking into these things because with technology, it's going to help us to collect data a lot more. I think for us, we are gearing our research not so much into the sensing, but also to sense-make that data. So as much as we can have this data, I think it's important to make sure we understand that data. And once we do that, we can then use AI to help us to do that a lot faster. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how we see AI helping us as well. And also to use it as a tool to kind of bring the different sectors together to see if there are common practices. Because now it's platforms like this which are important where information is shared. But I think with AI and now with information so readily available, it's about consolidating and then quickly and constantly reviewing so that whatever lessons learned from one industry can be ported to another.
Okay, we're going to take a short break right now. So in the meantime, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this podcast. And also take a look at all our social media channels to stay updated of all the news. And go over to osha-singapore.com to find out more about what's happening at OSHA this year. Now back to the podcast. Would you be comfortable sharing maybe a case study of sorts or an example of how heat has actually, on the business side of things, right, reduced productivity for a specific client or industry, something along the lines where our audience can actually get inspired, I would say, or motivated to re-look into the current safety processes and really look at heat as a real priority here?
So thanks for bringing up. Our sister program actually completed a study and they looked across different sectors in the occupational setting. So I believe it was agriculture, manufacturing, construction, so on. Long story short, we looked at heat-induced productivity loss because when it is hot, it is likely that we will slow down. And therefore, there is that productivity loss. We quantified it working with our economist friends. And I think if I'm not wrong, the broad loss that we're looking at is about $20 an hour. Yeah. So that can compound.
Per head?
Yes.
Wow.
So that can compound, depending on sector, of course, to eventual economic loss due to reduced productivity.
Wow. Okay.
So this was a first cut exercise because it's not been done before. And I think it helps to kind of frame the challenge from a different perspective. We also have a lot of conversations with businesses because, of course, we know the bottom line is, of course, the profit. And therefore, we also want to encourage that it's not about protecting workers from heat means I need to give them more welfare and more rest, because it does sound counterintuitive. If I give you more rest means you're not working, so how can that lead to more productivity? But actually, we argue that no, and we found also in this project, it's called Project Heat Safe, by the way, and if you Google it, you will be able to find information. We found that actually, if we give them rest, they're actually more refreshed to start the next bout of work. And therefore, you do maintain productivity. So it's not a zero-sum game. And it can be beneficial for businesses as well.
So the premise is this, that if they were to work X number of hours consistently, the productivity would still be the same if you were to give them rest and they have a kind of a opportunity to catch up.
Yes, it could potentially even be better. I mean, we don't know. I mean, that's the different narrative, because I think the assumption is that if they are resting, they're not as productive, and therefore, overall net, I may lose productivity. And if we put on the health lens, we make sure that they have enough rest, they maintain their health, understanding the impacts that heat potentially have. We keep them protected. This would then mean less MC days. It means that later on, I do not have any other illnesses from a bigger picture perspective. I don't have longer term health issues that I'll need to deal with. So from a bigger picture lens, there are also benefits from that perspective.
Right. HRPC is heat resilience, right? Not human resources. Right? This is something like a human resource thing, the HR manager will be talking about as well.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that, we reduce the number of MCs, take care of our people and so forth?
Yes. So it's all interconnected. And I think it's important to know that then it's not two separate problems we need to address, that we address it holistically. And then it will start to address all the other bits altogether.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you do work with all these, to do all the research, and now you're working with direct clients as well, I would say, who are the stakeholders that you think should be on board?
Stakeholders wise, I think it depends on the challenge that we're talking about and the industry. So if we focus maybe on the occupational safety community, I think it would be the businesses, because as much as we do have policy, so that's your other stakeholders. So if the government is on board and they roll out broad policies, I think the companies and the industry will need to understand what those policies mean, and also then be empowered and also have some resources to be able to implement.
Right.
So I think that currently I think is where the challenge is, because I know in the industry there are SMEs, there are bigger companies, some more resourced than others. So some may have the means to implement more efficiently and optimally, others may not. So this could also be another conversation to see whether there are other means to help the less resourced companies to still abide by or try to implement some of these policies for worker protection.
I see. Okay. Circling back to what we talked about at the very beginning, which was the rising temperatures in the region. I'd just like to see and also understand, right here in Singapore, I'm very certain that we have very, very high standards, again, when it comes to safety. But HRPC has also embarked on some projects in the region as well. Tell me a little bit more about what those projects are, if you're at liberty to. And secondly, right, what are you seeing from other regions that are doing well that we can learn from, and likewise, vice versa? What is Singapore doing well that you think the region can actually pick up from?
Oh, so many things comes into my mind. Okay, the work we've done some work in the region. So that is Southeast Asia, and what we found in the Southeast Asia context is that they are actually have several problems that they need to solve. So several of our neighboring countries are developing as well. So what we found working with them is that the conversation is not so much about health and life, but more about livelihood. So what I mean by this is, okay, we can tell them that it's going to be hot, you need to protect yourself, you need to take rest. But the farmer in Thailand, for example, will tell me, I can't afford to rest, because if I don't harvest and I'm not out in the farms, despite it being hot, I will not be able to bring back enough money to feed my family. So the conversation actually shifts. And for us being in Singapore, I know, and we are very blessed, but it's the narrative then shifts, because yes, I know there is risk. Yes, I know it's going to impact my health. Yes, I know it's not good and I should take measures. But if I can't secure my livelihood, I will take that risk. So that's what we've learned from working in the region. And that actually we think these are important people and industries that we should help with strategies, solutions that they can use so that they can secure both livelihood and maintain health and safety. We've also learned on the flip side that then actually they are very resilient. And because sometimes they don't have access to technology, the community efforts are actually quite strong. And that is something I think we've found that we want to kind of learn more to harness and to see how we can leverage off the more community aspects in terms of sharing of information, helping one another, and also maybe more 1G type solutions that they use. So there's another track that we're also keen to explore, which is what we call the traditional and cultural management of heat. Because heat is not new, our grandfathers and all have experienced heat. And there are ways I think that they have used. And so we are on a little bit of a side hunt to understand and uncover all of these to see whether, okay, if it's done before, has it worked? Why has it worked? Is there any scientific evidence for it? And if yes, then maybe we could start to adopt some of these things. Because with solutionings for heat, it can go a merit. If you have the resources, you can go the full bells and whistles. But there are industries or communities, for example, that do not have the resources, but still we want to develop strategies and solutions to still be able to help them.
So I hear that there's going to be a lot of innovation that is required, even on the 1G level.
Yes.
But curious, anecdotally, are there any 1G solutions that are still strong and standing very, very well in today's context?
Yeah. That would be the simple use of a fan.
Really?
Yes. So up to a certain level, of course, the fan actually does wonders. Because the moment you have ventilation and air movement, it does help to reduce the thermal sensation and comfort levels. So this is more for a non-exertional context, which I'm not exerting, because when you exert, you will produce metabolic heat. So in a non-exertional context, the fan actually works. So we actually advocate what we call hybrid cooling. So you can still turn on the aircon, of course, but maybe increase that temperature. And you have a fan, turn on the fan. You will realize that with the fan, you actually can reach that same environment and temperature. Not only is it good for the environment because we reduce our use of electricity and therefore carbon footprint, you also still feel comfortable and cool. So this can work in indoor work environments as well as a strategy, and that helps the electricity bill too.
Now, when we talk about safety, right, it's really about being preventive. But how do you think businesses can look at this topic in areas of performance improvement instead? Because right now it sounds like very doom and gloom. Oh, if you don't do this, the mortality rate is going to increase. But how do we then look at this in terms of performance improvement instead? What tips or tricks can you share with our audience today?
So thanks for that. I think we always do try to include in the conversation that it's not all doom and gloom. Heat, after all, is a stressor, which means that you can use it for good as well, while it can, in the flip side, cause harm to some extent. Yeah. So there's two sides of the coin. So with heat, I think we want to learn to harness it a bit like how we've been harnessing solar energy. And what we've thought of, and we're beginning to explore, is how then to use this to help with adaptation. So one key thing to help one cope with the heat, as part of all the spectrum of strategies, is what we call acclimatization, which means that you slowly get used to the environment, and that it requires some time because there are what we call physiological adaptations that happen internally, so that your body increases what we spoke about with your adaptive capacity. So we have the hypothesis that, okay, if I need to maintain aerobic fitness and allow me to have those adaptations, I need to maybe run or exercise in the morning. And typically my regime could be 60 minutes. And because I want to avoid the heat, I go at 6 or 7 in the morning. Because now it's about causing the stress to my body, I can maintain or maybe attain that same amount of stress in a shorter period of time if I choose to maybe exercise in a hotter part of the day. This is, of course, understanding what the signs and symptoms are, of course. But then if, let's say, I exercise at 10 o'clock in the day, I have the additional stress of heat used for good. Now I can reduce my exercise time to 30 minutes, for example. So I attain the same amount of adaptation that I need in a shorter period of time. So that's an example of how we think heat can be used for good. From a business perspective, slightly trickier, but I think it comes back down to understanding that there is a need for work and for rest. And that for workers who may come from other parts of the world, that they need time for them to acclimatize. And this could be one way, slow exposure to the heat, in a calibrated manner, of course, to get them used to the heat so that they maintain and then can go back into the workforce faster.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, before we close out this podcast, right, I love to pick your brain on this, which is give me something that you wish more safety leads would know about heat.
The classic one is when it is hot, please drink. Not that drinking is not good.
Water, right?
Water, hydrating. Yeah. So hydration is a strategy, but it's not the only strategy because being in Singapore, we think that ask me to drink one, for example, I think to be even better, I will drink more. And then that's important to note because we don't want to swing to the other extreme, which is what we call water intoxication. Yeah. So do drink. Yes, it is an important strategy, but drink sufficiently. And if you're going to ask me the next question, what do you mean by sufficiently? The best way, and I tell that to my kids, is to look at the color of your urine. So we keep it as light as possible. That will give you an indication of how hydrated you are. The other strategies, as we've mentioned, so will be keeping yourself fit, employing work rest cycles at the workplace, using cooling strategies, whether is it pre-cooling, during exercise or during work cooling, rest. And all these things do help vis-a-vis just only drinking. So that would be the first thing that comes to mind in terms of breaking understanding that there are other strategies out there.
And what are the new discoveries, I would say, with regards to these safety or heat management things? What's currently new in the market that people are going, oh, that's really interesting?
Yeah, I think many people have seen these neck coolers and blowers. I think those...
neck fans.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So those can help from managing of thermal discomfort. Again, we caution not to use this if you are exerting because you are generating more heat. So we don't want you to feel you're cool, but actually inside you are hot. So in less exertional contexts, workers can use this when they're resting for thermal comfort, and that could help. And actually on this note, we also want to highlight that it's not so much about being hot internally, and that means my core temperature is high. Thermal discomfort can actually result in safety considerations. So if I can give the example, if you are in a hot room and you're a very seasoned worker and you're used to running the machine, it's very hot and very uncomfortable. Okay, step 6, not so important. So I will likely rush through that process, and that can lead to incidents or accidents. So that's how heat and thermal discomfort can actually cause incidents and accidents as well.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it's very nice that you can bring that up because it's, I guess we as Singaporeans see a lot of people using the neck fans and all these other cooling devices, right? Be it on the trains or all that. So it's a classic example of indoor heat at work, literally in the trains or whatever, where you have a lot of bodies stacked together, right? And it gets very, very hot. So I can only imagine that in settings of an office or even a server room where it does generate a lot of heat. And if the AC just goes down one time, it's game over for quite a number of people as well. So they need to be able to take care of themselves. So thanks so much for sharing all these insights, your frameworks, as well as tips and tricks of what safety managers should be able to look into and what the industry is also going forward with.
Thank you.
That being said, that camera is yours. So feel free to connect with the audience. Let them know how they can connect with you and also maybe what kind of collaborations that the HRPC is looking for.
Sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity. We are at the Yong Loo Lin School of Medicine at the NUS. Our website link is actually quite long, so I encourage you to just Google Heat Resilience and Performance Center, NUS, and you should be able to find us. We're in the space of looking for anyone or everyone who's interested to work in this space of heat and health. So be it industry, research, students who want to do internships with us, please feel free to reach out so that we can continue the work and then continue to help everyone live, work, and play in a hot environment. Thank you.
Okay, so that's it for this episode of OSH Insights. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, you heard from Lydia Law, the co-director of the Heat Resilience and Performance Center here in Singapore. Again, we're talking about heat resilience and how it affects productivity on the whole, not just in Singapore, but in the region. Not just for your field work, outdoor work, but also for indoor as well. Over 200,000 mortalities and injuries, right, come from heat alone. And this is something that we've overlooked. So as a safety professional, do relook into this within your own safety frameworks, and let's see how you can make yourselves an adaptable safety framework as well. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this podcast, and also take a look at all our social media channels to stay updated of all the news, and go over to osha-singapore.com to find out more about what's happening at OSHA this year. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast as much as I did. We'll see you in the next episode of OSH Insights.